Namaskar to everyone and good evening. So we're beginning. So today onwards we are beginning a new chapter in our series. So till last session we were discussing, we are giving an overview of Indian philosophical systems with some fundamental principles related to the hermeneutics of Indian philosophy. So today we are beginning a series with special focus on one of the systems of Vedanta. It is Advaita Vedanta. So Vedanta philosophical traditions are almost 6 or 7, you can say, beginning with Shankaracharya, Ramanuja, Nimbarka, Madhvacharya, Vallabha, Chaitanya, and there is a new school of Vedanta which perhaps cannot claim to be an independent school. That is a view put forward by the Swami tradition in the 19th century, which claims to be a new dispensation, but it cannot actually be detached from the Ramanuja Madhva tradition. So Shankara's tradition took final shape in the 9th century when he wrote commentaries on 3 fundamental canonical traditions of Vedanta, known as Prasthana Traya. That's an important term for anyone who studies Vedanta. Prasthana Traya means 3 fundamental schools or denominations, approaches to Vedanta. And then came Madhvacharya in 11th, 12th century, then Nimbarka in again 12th and 13th, Madhvacharya again 13th and 14th, and then Vallabha in the 15th, and then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and so on. This is the tradition. Now, a few important principles which are common to all these interpretations. I mean, these are the key to the hermeneutics of Vedantic textbooks. Hermeneutics, for those of you who may be already familiar, it is the science of interpretation of scriptures, but formally it was used in the context of interpreting Christian scriptures, but in the broader sense, you can say it is the science of interpretation, the fundamental principles of interpretation applied in interpreting philosophical, theological classics. So there is one important principle which was put forward by Shankaracharya, which is very important, very crucial. That is Padavakya Pramana Jnaha Hi Samyak Shastrartham Adhyavasidam Shaknoti. So what is the fundamental principle of interpreting Vedantic text? A single sentence. So he says Pada, Vakya and Pramana, means a scholar who has got a thorough knowledge of Pada, means the word, the sentence, and its interpretation, and also the theory of knowledge, the fundamental principles applied in interpreting, it is related to epistemology. So I shall explain a few things here. Pada means word. So a scholar interpreting this book should have a complete, thorough understanding of the word meaning. Not only the literal meaning, but also the implied meaning. So literal meaning is called in Sanskrit Vachyartha, means what the word actually means in letter. But that meaning can only be a fraction of the real, or it may be even different, totally different from the real meaning, the implied meaning. That is called Lakshyartha. So, and this is very, very important. Why it is important? Even in interpreting the most profound and the most fundamental statements in the entire Vedic literature, the 4 Mahavakyas that I already mentioned in my last session. Tattwamasi, Aham Brahmasmi, Prajnanam Brahma, Ayamatma Brahma. 4 great statements taken from 4 Upanishads representing 4 Vedas. From Rig Veda, that is Aitareya Upanishad, Prajnanam Brahma. From Atharva Veda, Mandukya Upanishad, Ayamatma Brahma. From Yajurveda, Brihadaranya Upanishad, Tattwamasi. From Yajurveda, Brihadaranya Upanishad, Aham Brahmasmi. From Chandogya Upanishad, Samaveda, Tattwamasi. So these are the 4 fundamental statements in the entire Vedic literature. I want to repeat again. The first one is Tattwamasi. It is the statement of instruction. From Samaveda, Chandogya Upanishad. Then we have 2 statements which are related to the practice of what instruction you have received. Prajnanam Brahma and Ayamatma Brahma. Prajnanam Brahma is from Aitareya Upanishad, that is Rig Veda. Ayamatma Brahma is from Mandukya Upanishad, it is from Atharva Veda. Then the fundamental statement of one's own real experience is Aham Brahmasmi, it is from Brihadaranya Upanishad, that is from Yajurveda. Now, while interpreting these Mahavakyas, there are very serious, we may say something funny, laughable differences between Shankaracharya on the one hand, Ramanuja and Madhva on the other hand, and other commentators. I already mentioned this earlier. Tattwamasi is interpreted as Atattwamasi in the Madhva tradition. Means what you are seeking is actually not you, but it is a God who sits outside of you, a God who is different from creation, it's more or like the monotheistic concepts of Abrahamic traditions or popular Hinduism, where God, the creator, is different from the creation. It's a different matter. So, Shankaracharya says, one should have a clear understanding and a method of interpreting the word and the sentence, and also the tools of knowledge, the epistemology used in interpreting. That is very important in hermeneutics. That is, Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana, Sabda, Arthavatya, Anupalabdhi. These are the 6 pramanas, 6 tools of epistemology used in Advaita Vedanta by Shankaracharya. Some of you, I don't know how many of you may be interested in this, but it's a very subtle point. It's an intellectual exercise in a way. Hindu philosophical systems are surprisingly elastic. You'll be surprised, even the Greek systems of philosophy, there may be maximum 3 tools, 3 fundamental tools of knowledge, in the theory of knowledge, epistemology. That is direct perception, inference, then you can use comparison. Of course, in Christian theology is important, verbal testimony is very important, the revealed text. But in Hindu Vedantic tradition, there are 10, no less than 10 pramanas mentioned in so many other fringe groups. Pratyaksha is direct perception, inference is, of course, Anumana, that is linked to direct perception, analogy is comparison, and then then there is this verbal testimony, then the presumption, and anupalabdhi or abhava means the knowledge, knowing the absence of something. So if you have the knowledge of something that doesn't exist there, that is also considered to be a knowledge. I mean, negation also is a knowledge. Going beyond that, some of the fringe groups, they extend inference and presumption in all directions. So they say Sambhava, Aitihya, Cheshta and Parisheshya. 4 extra tools of knowledge. So Sambhava means something has happened that is actually linked to pratyaksha, direct perception only. Aitihya also can be referred to inference. And then chesta is external gesture. Aitihya means mythology, hearsay and so on. Chesta is external gesture. Somebody who looks famished, looks poor, wearing rags, if he stretches out his arms, you can say he's asking for food. So this also is a kind of additional tool of epistemology according to some fringe groups, not mainstream Vedantins. And then Parisheshya is, after leaving out all possibilities, you take out what is the only way to assume. For example, the classical example that will make it clear instead of explaining. Suppose there is a group of 20 people and a teacher comes to a classroom and he finds that a huge furniture is kept on the top of the shelf, and there are 20 students, 19 of them, he analyzed, he found they could not have done it because they are short, they are weak, or they are not inclined to do mischief in the classroom. The 20th one is tall, healthy and slightly mischievous. So you decide this man can be responsible. Parisheshya means what is left out, parisishta. Now that's a different matter. This is the story of the development of epistemology in Indian philosophical traditions. That's why Shankaracharya says one should have a clear understanding of the word meaning, and also he should be able to understand the literal meaning and also its implied meaning. In fact, the implied meaning is very important while interpreting Mahavakyas. Without taking up the implied meaning, called Lakshyartha, you cannot get correct meaning, you cannot get the correct understanding of the Mahavakyas. That you are going to find out in the course of time. So, and then Pramanas. So, according to Shankaracharya, he says, you should listen to scriptures, read books, try to understand, use your reasoning, sutya, yuktya, use your own power of reasoning, that is yukti, and then you should experience it. Now remember, this is a very, very important point in any study of comparative philosophy. This is very crucial. Advaita is perhaps the only philosophical system in the world which tells you that you cannot really claim to have understood the reality unless you have experienced it. Faith or belief have a very, very limited meaning or importance in Vedanta. This is a very important thing. That's why Shankaracharya, like a slogan, he goes on shouting all over his writings. Sutya, read books, listen to sermons, preachers, lecturers, fine, then use your reasoning power, and then try to practice, follow the disciplines, and then you should experience it. That's why there is a statement in one of the very important Vedantic texts called Naishkarmya Siddhi by Sureshwaracharya. He says, all Vedantic books are important, but the experience is beyond all those books. So every book is only a help to go beyond books. Books are not substitute for experience. That is why Swanubhuti, one's own real experience, is the ultimate and final criterion for spirituality in Vedanta. So these are important things. This principle ensures, guarantees a kind of intellectual integrity. That's why I mentioned earlier, when we study Vedanta, we should not take one statement from somewhere and make our own freelance interpretation. Everyone has the freedom to do that. But if you really want to know the true implication of it, you should try to understand the received interpretation. See, I mentioned this earlier. Suppose I want to study Christianity, Christian theology. I cannot just read one sentence from Bible and then give my own interpretations and pretend to be an authority on Christianity. I cannot do that. If I want to be considered to be an authority in Christianity, I should study the Bible. I should try to study Augustine, Aquinas, or other interpreters, and then try to understand in my own way. Then I can try to understand, and then I can give my own interpretation. So first of all, one should understand the received, traditionally accepted meaning, and then based on that we can differ. We can differ from the traditional interpretation, but we should understand the traditional interpretation. That's very important, and then we can differ. So that's why Shankaracharya says, Padavakya pramanajnyaha. Every teacher should know the meaning of Pada, Vakya and Pramana. Now, there is another very important principle in Vedantic hermeneutics, and this is also very important. It is a method of finding out the essence of a book, the ultimate message, the theme of a book. This is also very important. So there is a well-known statement, Brahmani samanvedi upakramadi shadvidha talperi linga darshanat ityuktam. The meaning is simple. Shadvidha linga darshanas. 6 methods of finding out the essence of a text. The 6 different methods of analyzing to find out the real implication of a text. Well, the first method is this one. Upakrama and Upasamhara. Upakrama means beginning. The idea with which that book begins and the idea with which it concludes. Upasamhara means conclusion. Vicharivakya adintayoho egartha paryavasanam atra sadeva idi upakramaha sa atma tattwamasi idi upasamharaha. This is in the context of Tattwamasi Mahavakya Vichara, Bhashkara says. Anyway, this is a traditional scholar's view. So first of all, you should know with what idea a text begins and with what idea the text concludes. Second, what is the idea that is repeated again and again in that text? Abhyasa. Abhyasa means continued practice. Aninyaparam punap sravanam atraja tattvamasidi navakrutva abhyasa. The example is taken from the 6th chapter of Chandogya Upanishad, where Tattwamasi Mahavakyam is analyzed, is discussed. It is repeated 9 times. First instruction, then 8 repetitions at the request of the student. So, if you want to know, in a lecture also, what's the idea with which the speaker begins? Of course, today in internet and Google, everything is upside down, inside out. So everything stands in Sishasana practice, the fundamental principles of hermeneutics will stand on Sishasana in modern times. But we are talking about the good old times when great traditional scholars who have spent years in studying subjects and texts, they agreed on some fundamental principles on how to find out the essence of a text. So he says, what is the idea that is being repeated again and again? The third one is apurvada. Apurva means uniqueness. What is the special idea that this particular text conveys, which is not found elsewhere? Pratipadyasya arthasya manantara agocharatvam atraja jiva brahmaikyam pratipadyam na manantara gocharam. This also is, an example is taken from Tattwamasi Mahavakya Vichara. Means something that is unique to that particular text, which is not found elsewhere. This is the important thing. You can easily apply these principles in studying 2 great names in Christian theology. The Confessions, City of God, or Augustine, or you can also applied these principles in studying the works of Aquinas. So Augustine, for example, the radical sinfulness of man can be considered to be apurvada. I'm just applying this old Vedantic principle to Christian theological tradition. The fourth important criterion to consider in finding out the essence of a book is phalam, prayojana, means that book tells you, if you read this, you can understand this one. This book conveys a special message. This is the benefit, this is the benefit, the advantage, the result that you are going to get by reading this book. Apurvada prayojanam tasya tavadeva chiram yavat na vimokshe atha sampatsi moksha. This again is the context of Tattwamasi. But this is applicable to all texts. Means, what is the special benefit, advantage or result that the text promises you when you read that? So one should be ready to, one should have fitness to study the book, one should know the theme, then one should know the connection between that book and the fundamental purpose with which you are studying. All this that you find later, we will discuss that subject in another context. And then the fifth criterion is arthavada, means prasastyam atraja eka vijnanena sarva vijnanam. So okay, means certain text will tell you by reading, to find out the essence of a text. What is the special view, what idea will be revealed to you, what new spiritual idea or enlightenment will be revealed to you by studying this book. So in the Chandogya Upanishad context, according to tradition, for example, ekena mripandena sarvam murmayam vijnanam syad, this idea is given in the Chandogya Upanishad by making a close study of a pot or jar made of clay. You can study the characteristics of all vessels made of clay. Or by studying, let us say, a single golden ornament which is made of gold, you can come to understand, you can actually know all about the different ornaments made of gold of the same quality, of the same type, like that, So by knowing which, everything else becomes known. By knowing which, everything else becomes known. So that is one. Upapatti is yukti. Annena sunkena apo muramanyuchicha. This is Chandogya context. Upapatti means the logical argument. What is the logical argument? What is the idea that is being expounded logically in this particular text? So these are the six methods of understanding, finding out the true meaning of a text. Now coming to Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, or Vedanta in general, but Advaita Vedanta in special context, there are three foundational texts in Advaita Vedanta. Three foundational texts. It is called Prasthana Trayi or Prasthana Trayam. That is, one is Shruti Prasthanam, the Upanishads. The other one is Smriti Prasthanam, Bhagavad Gita, because Mahabharata, being a classical work, has the status of a Smriti in Vedantic tradition. So Bhagavad Gita is a small fragment of Mahabharata which has got more than 100,000 verses, and Gita is only 700 verses in 18 chapters. So Bhagavad Gita represents Smriti Prasthanam, and then another important book, it needs some explanation which I am going to do very soon. It's called Nyaya Prasthanam, it's called Brahma Sutras. 555 sutras. So this is the most foundational text of Vedanta. First, the Sruti part. And among the Srutis, the most important Upanishads, which are commented upon by Shankaracharya. Shankaracharya has written commentaries on 10 Upanishads. Isha, Kena, Katha, Prasthana, Munda, Mandukya, Taittiriya, Aitareya, Chandogya, Brihadaranyaka. These are 10 Upanishads called the Upanishads. Altogether, today we know about 260 Upanishads. 230 Upanishads are already available in print. But we should remember, not all those Upanishads are necessarily unique in many ways, because some of the Upanishads are very, very short. Some of them, of course, contain very important ideas about Hindu tradition. For example, Narasimha Upanishad, Narada Parivrajaka Upanishad, all these contain the mantras which are really uttered during the time of mendicancy, taking ordination of all these. So there are innumerable Upanishads altogether. Right now, they claim to have discovered 260, but 230 Upanishads are right now available in printed form, of which 108 are very important. Again, of the 108, 36 Upanishads are very, very important because they are mentioned in the Muktiga Upanishad. That is why. So I should try to give an overview of this Prasthana Traya. This is very, very important. Why this is important? This is an ancient tradition. And what Shankaracharya did, he lived in 8th century. What he did, he took out these 10 Upanishads and then he wrote commentaries. Many of these Upanishads contain stories, especially Chandogya and Brihadaranyaka contain stories, parables, some almost like some stories are like Puranas. But that's only a small part of it. But the commentator himself says the central theme of these Upanishads is the philosophy of unity and oneness of existence, Advaita Vedanta. And he established this principle by by interpreting some of these most important philosophical texts in the Upanishads according to Advaita tradition, with a view to establish Advaita tradition. He has written exhaustive commentaries, even the most elaborate, most extensive, voluminous of these Upanishads called Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Sukla Yajurveda, which perhaps the greatest Upanishad is Brihadaranyaka, which contains Aham Brahmasmi Mahavakya. So now coming to Prasthanatraya. So please remember, Prasthanatraya means 3 fundamental canonical traditions of Vedanta. Of this Prasthanatraya, one Prasthana or one tradition represents the Vedas, Shruti, the Vedas, 10 Upanishads on which Shankaracharya has written commentaries. That is Isha Upanishad, Kena Upanishad, Katha Upanishad, Prasthana Upanishad, Mundaga Upanishad, Mandukya Upanishad, Aitareya Upanishad, Taittiriya Upanishad, Chandogya Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, etc. Now we should remember, in this list there is another Upanishad, Sweda Sudara Upanishad. Today you can find text printed with the name Sweda Sudara with the commentary of Shankaracharya. But there are disputes as to the authorship of the commentary on the Sweda Sudara. But traditional scholars believe that it is by Shankaracharya himself. And in addition to these 10 or 11, if we include Sweda Sudara, there are other Upanishads which have assumed importance just because Shankaracharya refers to or quotes from these Upanishads in his Bhashya commentary on Brahma Sutras. Kaushitaki, Talavakara Brahmanam, Chedasidaram, then Mahanarayana Upanishad, Maitrayani Upanishad, Kaivalya Upanishad, Atharva Shira Upanishad, Atharva Siksha Upanishad. These are some of the Upanishads that have got some credibility or authenticity because Shankaracharya has written commentaries on this. So this is called Sruti Prasthanam. The second Prasthanam is Smriti Prasthanam, as I mentioned, Bhagavad Gita. Actually, it corresponds to practicing what the Upanishads teach. You'll find that if you read Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavad Gita contains not only philosophy but also a method of practice. Yoga Trayam, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. These three yogas represent three methods of spiritual disciplines to be practiced by a person who studies the Upanishads. So they correspond to the experience part of it, Anubhuti. The third Prasthana is Brahma Sutras. It's called Nyaya Prasthana. Now this is something very interesting. Brahma Sutras are small, simple sutras, pithy statements, simple statements, which by itself may not mean much unless you listen to a commentator or you read a commentary. Otherwise, Brahma Sutras may not make much sense for a beginner. That's why the sutra itself has its own meaning. Alpaksharam asadhigdam saravat vishrutomukham astobham anavadyam cha sutram sutra vido viduhu. There is a small definition or description of what sutra means. First of all, it should be very brief. Some sutras are very, very brief. Sometimes, Panini's Ashtadhyayi last sutra is which actually describes the closed and open vowels. So, some of the sutras, especially in the Panini's Ashtadhyayi, and many of the, even Brahma Sutra also, some sutras are very, very small. Some of them are quite long. So, Brahma Sutras contain 555 sutras, pithy, brief statements. These statements make sense only when you read the sutras along with the commentaries. And in these commentaries, Shankaracharya quotes from all these Upanishads, from the 10 Upanishads that he himself commented upon, plus of course Veda Sudara, and then Kaushidaki, Kaivalya and other Upanishads. So he makes these Upanishad statements, he quotes them, then he proves that the central thesis of these 555 sutras is that Brahma Satyam Jagad Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Napara, which means the absolute reality is one. And this world as name and form is only relative. If you look at this world, or if you look at all human beings devoid of name and form, essentially the same reality as Brahman is the same reality as Brahman. In other words, spiritual and philosophical oneness of existence. That's the central theme. One thing you should remember, that's very important to remember. Shankaracharya never says the other views are wrong. No. This is an important point to remember. Many people have got very wrong notions that Advaita Vedanta tells you that it is the only path. No. Advaita Vedanta tells you that as you evolve in your spiritual life, you reach a point, inevitably you reach a point where you realize that God whom you are worshipping is essentially the same divine spirit that is all-pervading and that is also present in ourselves, that is also transcendental. Again, this is not a matter of philosophical construct or a concept. It is a matter of experience. Yet sakshat aparokshat Brahma. It is not direct perception. You cannot directly perceive Brahman. But at the same time, it is not indirect in that sense. Why? Because when you reach that level of experience, you realize that Brahman is your own essential inner being. So it is very intimate. It's sakshat aparoksha. The word used is not pratyaksha, but aparoksha. Aparoksha means that non-indirect. That's the meaning here. So, this is an important point, remember. Again, this is a matter of our spiritual evolution. We all begin with worshipping God, praying to God in a church or a temple, in a synagogue, reading a book, holy book, or singing some devotional hymns. That's how we begin our spiritual life. But as we evolve further, we begin to realize, again it's a matter of experience, not intellectual conviction. Intellectual conviction is very good, but experience is very important. Paroksha jnanam is very good, but aparoksha jnanam is the ultimate criteria, means the ultimate direct experience. Now, when a person evolves in his devotional practices, then what happens? Slowly he realizes that the God whom I am worshipping in the temple or praying to in the church or in the Buddhist temple or synagogue, wherever it is actually not residing in that place, church or a temple. He is residing there, but he is residing outside also. He is all-pervading. He is an all-pervading divine reality. I shall conclude this part of the statement by referring to a very important statement in the devotional classic called Bhagavata Purana. Bhagavata Purana is the most important, most significant devotional classic in Indian philosophy. The most, in fact, Narada Bhakti Sutras, Shandilya Bhakti Sutras are all, we can say, they are all shorter versions of Bhagavata Purana. 18,000 verses, 12 skandhas, 335 chapters. Now, there is a discussion in that book between a philosopher king with the name Nimi and 9 sages. These 9 sages happened to visit this philosopher king in his court one day. So the king puts different questions to him. Many questions. Kavir Harir Andariksha Prabuddha Pipalayana Avihotrota Dumilas Chamasa Karabhajanaka. 9 sages. Kavihi Ari Andariksha Prabuddha Pipalayana Avihotra Drumila Chamasa Karabhajana. 9 sages. They come to this king's court. The king asks many questions to them. But one question is very important. The question is, who is the greatest devotee? Bhagavatottama means in Sanskrit. You know, in all devotion circles in India, Bhagavat means the highest devotee. One may expect a highest devotee may be somebody who goes to temple and prays every day. Of course, the highest devotee goes every day to the temple, but he doesn't believe that that's the only way of expressing devotion. That's the only difference. So the answer given is, Sarva Bhudeshu Yapashyet Bhagavat Bhavam Atmanaha Bhudani Bhagavadi Atmani Esha Bhagavatottamaha. Antarisha gives the answer. It says, the one who sees the presence of God in everyone, in everything, and the one who feels the presence of everyone and everything in God, he is the highest devotee. Now this is Advaita in real experience. This is what an Advaitin feels actually. This is what an Advaitin feels. Shankaracharya himself wrote more than 65 devotional poems. If you look at in Sanskrit language, the most moving devotional poetry were written by Shankaracharya, who was Advaita philosopher. When he went to South India, he went to Kanchi, he went to other temples. When he went to North India, he went to Badri, Kedarnath. When he went to the mid part of India, he went to Sri Shailam and many places. Everywhere, when he went, he prayed before these deities, like a Dvaiti, Visita Dvaiti. But then, his outpouring of devotion, it begins like this. I mean, oh Lord, protect me. You can say, one of the famous devotional hymns attributed to him, Gadistum, Gadistum, Tameka Bhavani, or Divine Mother, you are my only destination, my only refuge. That means the highest devotee is the same as the highest philosopher in real experience. And Advaitin is the highest devotee, because Advaitin can see the presence of God not only in the temple but everywhere. So this kind of spiritual oneness, feeling of spiritual oneness, the entire creation is the essence of Advaitic experience. But remember, this is not discussed in the Brahma Sutras. If you look for these ideas in Brahma Sutra, you will not get it, because Shankaracharya wrote his commentaries on Prasthana Traya to establish Advaita philosophy, because he had a mission before him. The mission was to counter the arguments of the philosophers of ritualism, called him Purvamimamsakas, who tried to establish that the Vedas only teach about living a happy life in this world and living a happy life in heaven, in their own concept of heaven, which is different from the concept of heaven in the Abrahamic traditions, the place where you can have all the wonderful things that you already enjoyed in this life, there you can have. That is the idea of heaven. So this is the only purpose of Vedic teachings, performing yajnas, yagas, rituals and so on. Shankaracharya said, no, you are not correct. Those who do not have any interest in enjoying this world, in having money and wealth, they need not perform rituals, chanting prayers, Pashyema Sharada Satam Jivema Sharada Satam Bhuyesa Sharada Sadad, etc. You have the fire ceremonies, fire sacrifices, where you perform these offerings, praying to different deities. Please give me wealth, please give me big family and things like that. Shankaracharya, it is okay to do that, but don't think that everyone should do only that. Like saying, a learned professor study, teaching in a university, he should study the alphabet, study the primary school, or every day he should study the kindergarten textbook every day in the morning. If you say that, it will be a torture for the professor. Or maybe if a 90-year-old man, who is a learned person, he must have been eating candy when he was a little boy, but you cannot say he should eat candy now, because he may be high diabetics. He may be thinking of something higher. I have had a happy life in this world. 3-4 generations can live happily. He had made enough wealth for all of them, big home, car, everything, and he had big reputation. And then if you tell him that, no, you should still eat the candies that you are eating when you are just 5-year-old, wrong. So Shankaracharya says, those who are not interested in material prosperity, in physical material enjoyments, they have the freedom to renounce, to become monks, to become sannyasis. I can finish this part of the discussion by referring to something. In Shankaracharya's commentaries, in the Brihadaranyaka Chandogya, and also in Brahma Sutras, there are opponents, those who raise objections to Advaita. And one of the most prominent opponents is Purva Paksha. It's called Purvamimamsa, the school of ritualists. Others are the different schools of Buddhism, Vainasikas, called Shunyavadins, Vijnanavadins, of course Sankhyas, and other schools are there. Bhatru Prapanchas, Jnana Karma Samuchayavada, which I will discuss later. So one There are many contexts, just only one I refer to. In the Brihadaranya Upanishad, for example, the ritualists tell, no, he is countering Advaita. No. Everyone should practice this, the full life. He should, when he is young, he should study, then he should study the Vedas, then he should marry. And then, when he becomes too old, or if he becomes blind, lame, or if he cannot see anything, if he becomes a dementia, whatever it is, Parkinson's disease, 90-year-old, then he can become a monk, but not before that. This is the view of Mimamsakas. Mimamsa, please remember that particular term is very important in Indian philosophy. Purva Mimamsa. Purva Mimamsa means the early part of, the school of ritualists. They insisted no one can take to philosophy, contemplation or higher life. Every healthy person who has got the means, the money, everything, should do that. So you can think of Swami Vivekananda, apparently the most brilliant graduate of Calcutta University at that time. And he became a mendicant, a monk with a stick. You can see his picture. He was walking all over India as a great philosopher, mystic. According to Purvamimamsa, they won't say, no, you should not do that. Shankaracharya himself was a brilliant young boy. By 6th year, he had finished all studies. So there are many great brilliant minds the world has produced, great mendicants. Purvamimamsas will tell you, no, every person should live a material life. Every person should try to pile up billions of dollars, should have private jets, should be able to go to Hawaii 4 times a day, maybe earning it. This would be the opinion of Purvamimamsas in modern times. So Shankaracharya is no. So he says, the statement is that Brahmacharyadva, Gruhadva, Vanadva, Yet Ahareva Virajit, Tat Ahareva Pravrajit. This statement, it comes in the Upanishad tradition. That is Brahmacharyadva. A person can become a mystic like Vivekananda did, even when he is a young man. Or when he is already married, he has done all duties and responsibilities in his married life, he can also turn to philosophy, contemplation, contemplative life. Or after taking to contemplative life, living in isolation, if he wants to become a monk, he can become a monk. The meaning is transcending the ordinary concept of material life, bohemian life, utilitarian life. Any person can take to higher life or contemplative life, no matter what his age is, no matter what his health condition is. So this is important point. So you find, I'm just giving an example, the contrast between Purvamimamsakas and Vedantics. Now I shall conclude the description of Brahma Sutras, then come to another subject. So Brahma Sutras contain the following teachings. One is, what is the nature of Brahman? In fact, the first sutra is Adhatu Brahma Jijnasa. Ataha Brahma Jijnasa. Now onwards, we can contemplate on, we can inquire into the nature of the ultimate reality. This is how Brahma Sutra begins, the first one. And then it also tells you that the highest spiritual goal is attained through Brahma Sakshatkara, Brahma Jnanam. That is the ultimate purpose. Secondly, the ultimate way for spiritual liberation, coming out of this transmigratory cycle of existence, is Brahma Jnanam. That means, so long as we think We are only the physical body or this body-mind complex. So long as we identify ourselves with this body and body-mind complex, so long as that is our interpretation of what we are, we will be continuously moving through this wheel of birth, life, death and rebirth. The moment we realize our true spiritual identity, that we are something other than, something beyond this body-mind complex, we are the Atman, that moment our samsara, our movement along this wheel of birth, life, death and rebirth, this transmigratory cycle comes to an end. This is the this is something about this Brahma Sutra Bhashya. Now, something very important, another thing I want to mention to you. If you read any of the Shankaracharya's books, you find a lot of discussion between Buddhism and Vedanta. You have to remember, Shankaracharya was born in the year 778 AD and passed away 810 AD. According to another version, he was born in 788 AD and passed away in 820, 32 years only he lived. Now, this was around, let us say, 1200 years after Buddha's passing away. Buddha's time is approximately in the 6th century BC. If you believe the most well-known date is it's 560 to 480. You have to count backward BC. So 80 years he lived. Now, between Shankaracharya and Buddha, there is this long period of gap of more than 1200 years, 12 centuries. Between this period, lot of changes have happened in the philosophical tradition of Buddhism. Buddhism became some kind of a nihilism, anarchism, and intellectual negativism. See, for example, one should understand this very clearly. Buddhism migrated from India. You know, it traveled to Sri Lanka, Burma, of course, and then Tibet, and then, of course, China, Cambodia, Thailand, and other places. Wherever Buddhism went, it took its own shape. It was integrated into the local culture and traditions. But within India, a lot of philosophical confrontations took place among Buddhists themselves. There were 4 schools of Buddhism that emerged from 2nd century BC up to around the 6th century AD, within 800 years. Shunyavada, Vijnanavada, 2 schools of idealism which belong to the Mahayana tradition, and Sautrantika and Vaibhashika, 2 schools of realism that belong to Hinayana tradition. There were serious quarrels and fights among them. In the process, what happened, some of the Buddhist idealists, schools of idealism became extremely anarchical, and maybe Buddha would not have recognized it. This was the situation when Shankaracharya was born. So naturally, he had to argue with many Buddhist scholars, and these arguments are arguments against this anarchism that later developed in Buddhism, can be found in the Prasthana Bhashyas. We should remember this very well, and I want to emphasize the point. There was absolutely no quarrel. People who don't have a sense of history, they think that Shankaracharya and Buddha were living the same time, they were fighting among themselves. It's something like saying that today we are living this 21st century. You cannot fight with somebody who lived in 7th century, 6th century AD. So, Buddha belonged to the 6th century BC, Shankaracharya belonged to the 8th century AD. So you have to remember this gap. So, and Buddhism had undergone a complete change. Buddha himself did not teach Shunyavada, Vijnanavada, Sautrantika, Vaibhashikas. Shunyavada was emerged only with Nagarjuna, who wrote Madhyamika Karika, Mula Madhyama Shastra, it's called. So, for example, I can give you an example. Shankaracharya quotes from one very important Buddhist scholar who belonged to the Mahayana tradition. His name is Dharmakirthi. He wrote a well-known book. It is called Pramana Vinishchayaka. They all wrote in Sanskrit. Something very interesting, the contrast. Buddha preached and spoke in Prakrit, and his teachings were coded, written down in Pali, the language of the common people. But these great philosophers, they wrote only in Sanskrit. Nagarjuna wrote only in Sanskrit. They won't have anything to do with Prakrit or Pali. They were elitists, remember. So you can imagine what Buddha was the common man's philosopher. He was a humanist. According to Swami Vivekananda, what Buddha did was he gave a humanistic interpretation of Upanishadic philosophy. But that was completely discarded in later centuries. After, let's say, 600, 700 years later. So, some of the books, for example, Alambana Pariksha, written by Dharmapala and others, create a lot of misunderstanding about Buddhism. So, the Apinnopi hi buddhyatma viparyasa darshanehi grahaka samvitti bhedavaniva lakshide. You can find some of these statements from Dharmakirthi can be found being quoted by Shankaracharya in his books. So what I mean to say, Shankaracharya in his Prasthana Bhashyas, he argues with the later Buddhists who may have deviated a lot from Buddha's original teachings, and also with the ritualists and also Sankhyas. See, remember, arguments do not mean rejection of everything. He is pointing out a higher spiritual possibility. It's totally different from a Kantian approach to British empiricism or humanism or anything. Kant wanted to establish this transcendental idea of the unknown and unknowable, one ultimate principle thing in itself, and also its moral counterpart. That's a different subject. So here, remember, Shankaracharya was not saying that others were totally wrong. What you are saying, if you put forward this argument, there is this problem. So there is a higher possibility. So very often, he puts forward their ideas as objectors' view, then he counters them with Advaita Vedanta. In other words, what do you say? He never tells others were totally wrong. I can quote one statement. In the Gaudapada Karika, there is one statement. Susiddhanta vyavasthasu dvaitino nischida dridam parasparam viruddhyante taihi ayam na viruddhyate. This is the Gaudapada. Gaudapada was an Advaitin scholar who wrote the well-known Gaudapada Karika called Mandukya Karika. Is an interpretation of Mandukya Upanishad. It's only 12 mantras, but Gaudapada Karika is a commentary in verses. There he says, Shankaracharya is a commentary on Gaudapada Karika. He says, Taihi anyona virodhibhihi asmadiyoyam vaidyo dharma na viruddhyate atma ananyatvad. The meaning of Gaudapada statement is this. Those who believe in Dvaita, dualism, they fight among themselves. They say, my path is the only correct path, the right one. Others are all wrong. But this Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, has no quarrel with anyone. Why? Because the same Atman, the same divine spirit is present everywhere in everyone. So how can we fight with others? Then elsewhere he says, Yatha suhasta padadibhihi. You cannot fight with your own hand. If you hit your head with your right hand, you will feel the pain. Similarly, we cannot do any harm to anyone. So Advaita Vedanta has this deep, universal, spiritualistic outlook towards life and humanity. So we will conclude today's session and you can open for interaction. You are most welcome with questions. You have to remember, it's a very, right now from today onwards, I'm beginning a special series focusing on Advaita Vedanta alone. After this, we shall take up the great philosopher Ramanujacharya and his philosophy. Of course, before that, we have to conclude Advaita. It may take several sessions. After that, we will take Ramanujacharya, Madhvas and others. So you are most welcome with questions. Namaskar. Thank you. Yeah.
Swami?
Yeah.
If Shankara, he pointed out what the major Upanishads are, it sounds like Hinduism was in complete disarray before Shankara. Is that?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. That's a very, very important question. Thank you for putting that question because I can fill up the gap which I may have overlooked during the main session. Now, if you look at the history of Hinduism, 3rd millennium BC, that's the time of Bhagavad Gita was preached. From 3rd millennium BC up to Buddha's time, 6th century BC. Now during this time, a lot of changes took place and this ritualism became a big force in Hindu society. In the Bhagavad Gita itself, Lord Krishna made some very strong statements against the ritualists. Remember, ritualism, when he criticizes ritualism, he is not saying that rituals are wrong or rituals are unnecessary. The only implication is those who believe that if they perform rituals, mechanical rituals, that's the end of spirituality, nothing more, nothing less. This view is wrong. So in the Gita you find Lord Krishna yakshe dasyami modishye idya jnana vimohidaha. Those who believe I shall perform this big Vedic sacrifice, I shall perform this ritual, they are all deluded. So Lord Krishna makes these statements in the Gita itself. There are strong statements against the blind ritualists in the Bhagavad Gita. But what happened, still ritualism became very prominent. So if you look at Buddha's life, one interesting story you may remember. He was born in Nepal and Lumbini, then most probably that was a small territory, maybe under a satrap of the Magadha Empire, Bimbisara. Bimbisara was the king of Magadha Empire. It was a huge empire. You can see the story. Buddha was walking and he found a shepherd were driving a lot of sheep. And he asked them, what's the matter? And one tiny lamb was limping. And Buddha took that lamb and held it on his shoulder and he walked into this big tent where the rituals were going on. So these sheep were supposed to be sacrificed for those rituals. Now remember, then he offered his own life instead of that lamb. And that completely transformed this man. He became a great Buddhist. So also Ashoka. Ashoka also became a great Buddhist. So the point is, during Buddha's time, you find this ritualism had taken a strong hold. And then Buddhism came. Buddhism had a healing, it had made a healing touch on Hinduism. Remember, Buddhism had not become an independent dispensation till around 3rd century BC. That's an important thing to remember. Buddhist Sangha mostly looked like the earlier Hindu mendicants, samagas who were walking all over the world, meditating. They were not organized into an order, into a monastic order. Buddha rather produced as an integrated, organized monastic order. That's the only difference. But what happened in Buddhism, Buddhism gave a healing touch into society, Indian society. But when Shankaracharya was born, there were these ritualists who were fighting with Buddhists, Kumarila Bhatta and Prabhagara. These are two important figures in the history of the most important figures after Jaimini, who is the original exponent of ritualist philosophy, Kumarila and Prabhagara, two important figures. They were living close to Shankara's times. Both, I think one of them was still alive. Kumarila was an old man when Shankaracharya was traveling in central provinces in North India. So they had an encounter, and then Kumarila suggested to Shankaracharya, I cannot argue with you, but you can go and have your argument with my most brilliant disciple. He went to Mandana Misra, and there's a long 15-day debate between Shankara and Mandana. It came later, Mandana was a disciple of Kumarila. So the ritualists have already won the field in favor of ritualism from Buddhists. But there was still Buddhism was very strong. So there was a lot of confusion. When Shankaracharya was born, there were these ritualists who were gaining ground in the Hindu tradition. And also there were the later Buddhists who were preaching a kind of spiritual anarchism. Those who are not aware of the difference between Buddhism in China, Japan, Thailand and Buddhism in India, they may not be able to fully get a clear picture, because in India Buddhism took a different direction, entirely different direction, because intellectual vigor was so strong. There were so many philosophers, Nagarjuna, Dharmakirthi, Chandrakirti, Dignaga, and there were dozens and dozens of great philosophers and dialecticians in Buddhist tradition. There, if you go to any library in Buddhist, there are thousands and thousands of great works, products of great brilliant minds. So they had already become popular, and then there were arguments with Mimamsakas, ritualist philosophers, and also there were the Charvakas, the Indian materialists. So there was a lot of confusion. As you mentioned, there was a lot of intellectual anarchism in Indian philosophical landscape when Shankaracharya was born. It's an important thing. Yeah, question is very important. You have to think of the history of the evolution of Indian philosophy right from 3rd millennium BC to 8th century AD. That's an important thing.
So it wasn't that they... So
and
there was
I shall conclude one more. Now, the Upanishadic period, the time when Upanishads were formed, were before Lord Krishna, 3rd millennium BC. Remember? The Upanishads were already the dominant works of Hindu tradition long before Krishna was born, because Lord Krishna also refers to Brahma Sutras. Brahma Sutra Padeschaiva, like there is a statement in the Gita. Lord Krishna refers to Vedas, Upanishads, Brahma Sutras. Brahma Sutra, not Bhashya, not commentary, but old real text is referred to in the Gita. So, this is, yes, you are right for pointing out, when Shankaracharya was born, there was a lot of anarchy, lot of confusion. And remember, unfortunately, this anarchy and confusion only at the higher level. It was an elitist society, that you have to admit. Those times. It's an elitist society. Elitism was the rule of the day. Sanskrit and philosophy and Vedas were the privilege of a small section of Indian population at that time. That's, as you know, it was true all over the world in one way or other. Okay, please continue.
Sorry, the one follow-up question was, so at that time there was this sort of spiritual anarchy. Was there anything kind of like was it very much more like Christianity? You perform rituals, you go to heaven, or was it more like you perform rituals and then you get enlightened?
Yeah, I will tell you, I have to point out this fact, this is a very good question, The concept of heaven, according to Mimamsaka rituals, is totally different from the concept of heaven in Christianity. So, if you read Augustine or City of God, Heaven in Christian tradition has some spiritual connection. Angels are living there. So remember. So there is an element of divinity and spirituality in the Christian concept of heaven. That heaven is not what is implied in the Mimamsa ritualism. It is a place where they can have lot of wealth, family, long life, perform rituals, and live for a long time, enjoying all material comforts. The way you see, the Mimamskas were very ascetic in nature. Every day so many baths, fasting, but all praying for living a happy life in heaven. So if you just analyze the life of a typical Mimamsaka, he'll be very ascetic, very ritualistic, very so much obsessed with their everyday performance of rituals and fasting and things like that, periodical performance of certain rituals, Paurnami and Chadurmasi and things like that. That is there, but their concept of heaven didn't perhaps have that spiritual element that you find in the Christian concept of heaven. That's an important thing to be remembered. Surga. So Surga is the English Sanskrit word. And that's why often you have to remember, in Indian tradition, Vedantic tradition, you should even desire to go to heaven is a bondage. You find this idea in Vedanta. You find all over Vedantic literature, you find a desire to go to heaven is a bondage. It's like a golden chain. Still you are bound, though the chain may be made of gold. So that should be understood in this context. Heaven also is an extended field of enjoyment. Whatever you have in this world, you can think of that you can have in plenty in heaven. So this is an important thing to remember. Going beyond heaven is the real path to liberation in Christian tradition, in Hindu Vedantic tradition, also in Buddhist tradition. Buddhist tradition also, you should look beyond heaven. In Hindu Vedantic tradition and Buddhist tradition, one should look going beyond heaven. In the Tattwamayanandaji, Nachiketa's second boon was, I should be able to go to heaven. Sattamagyam sugyam adeshimurtyo prabhurhitam surgadanayamakim surgaloka amrudatvam bhajante edat trayanam didiyam varambrane. My second boon I am asking, I should be able to go to heaven. And then Nachiketa, third boon is no. Heaven also is not enough, because in heaven also people may enjoy and live for a long time. Still that is perishable. That is inferior. I want to go beyond that. So he asked for the third boon. He's asking this question. Some people say after death there is nothing more left. Some people say no, something still left out. So what's the real truth? The fundamental questions of existence, meaning of life. That's the theme of the third boon that Nachiketa is asking to Yama. So, going beyond heaven. So, when you talk about Vedanta looking beyond heaven, you should remember Vedantic heaven is different from heaven as conceived in Christian tradition, in the city of God and the Augustinian theology. There, heaven has a spiritual element in it. Close proximity with God, company of angels who are very sattvic people. That's the difference. Okay.
Yogi, please ask your question.
Pranam Maharaj.
Yeah, namaskar. Yeah.
Linguistics research, language evolution shows that Indo-Iranian languages, Sanskrit and Persian evolved in parallel, and they have influence on each other. How much of the Zoroastrianism and other Persian religions have an impact on Vedas and vice versa?
No, Zoroastrian language is very close to Sanskrit. I don't know that language, so I cannot speak as an authority. I read something, but Zoroastrian religion is very close to the Hindu ritualism because they also worship fire. Fire is, fire is an important deity, Agni. In Agnimile Purohidam Yajnasya Devamurticham, the Rigveda begins, So Agni is an important theme in the entire Rigvedic literature. So perhaps there is some connection. As for language, that's another area. I cannot speak as an authority, but I have read Indo-Germanic language and its evolution is right now, at least it is considered to be a bit lopsided in its conclusions right now. So only some fraction of it, because Sanskrit language in one way or other must have existed long before the Harappan times, There's no doubt about it. So in that research, it took off very well and it continued right up to 1920s. After First World War, the research in those areas practically came to an end. Active research began in the late 18th century and continued throughout 19th. Then with the two wars, the interest in Indo-European, the evolution of Indo-European language, connection with Sanskrit, Greek, that came to an end. So I don't know where it remains right now. A lot of excavations have taken place since then. A lot more researches have taken place, and many manuscripts have been discovered in many places. So a lot of changes happened. It's a question that you should put to a professional linguist. But as a Sanskritist, I can tell you that Sanskrit really has some close connection, affinity with Rigveda. Rigveda language and Zoroastrian Zend-avastha are very, very close to each other. That is well known, well documented fact. Zend-avastha, Zoroastrian and Rigvedic language. Rigveda Sanskrit is not the Sanskrit that we read today, that we speak today. Rigvedic language is very irregular. It has not taken a definite grammatical form till much later. So the early Rigvedic language must have had some influence on Zoroastrian language. That's what I believe.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah.
Thank you. Swami, you mentioned that the battle between ritualists and Buddhism manifested itself differently in India as opposed to other countries in Asia. Could you elaborate a little on that?
Yeah. When Buddhism traveled to China and Tibet, these two places first, then elsewhere. Of course, separately, even in the third century BC, it went to Sri Lanka. Ashoka's daughter, Sankhamitra, herself went to Sri Lanka and spread Buddhism there. So, in these places, Buddhism took a local form. And the influence of Confucian, Lao's thinking, all must have influenced Buddhism. So you find, but surprisingly, a lot of Sanskrit texts were translated by Chinese pilgrims who came to India in the 5th century, 6th century, Huyen Tsang, Fa Hian and others who came to India. They translated many of the Sanskrit Buddhist texts into Chinese, and many of these texts were destroyed in India. They were they were completed with the help of Chinese translation. They were retrieved with the help of Chinese translation later on. So they took different forms. Buddhism in Indian background, in the Hindu background, it became very metaphysical. Very metaphysical. If you read, to give an example, if you read Nagarjuna's Madhyamika Karika, highly dialectical. That kind of dialectics did not exist in China at that time. elsewhere outside India. Extremely dialectical. All kinds of arguments, possible counter-arguments, and then again imaginary refutations or counter-arguments. All you find in Nagarjuna and others. Also Kumarila and others who wrote books on Mimamsa, Tantravartikam, and all that. So, a number of great philosophical, metaphysical, dialectical works were written by Buddhist scholars in India between 2nd century BC and 6th or 7th century AD. That was the time when Shankaracharya was born, 8th century AD. So, philosophical, dialectical works were not written in other countries like this. Mostly, they were led to prayer and meditation and so on.
How about the ritualistic part? That it sounds like in India there was on the one hand a ritualistic part and then a devotional and also a dialectic part. But in other countries there was neither a ritualistic part nor a dialectic part.
That is a funny part of India. In India, you find if you go to an Indian family, the father may be a devotee of Shiva, and the son may be going to Krishna temple, and the wife may be a devotee of another deity. There is no problem. This is something very interesting. So, but then, remember, there's an underlying principle that all these are different forms, different methods of connecting with the same ultimate spiritual reality. That is always, it may not be pronounced so openly, but it's always at the background. That's why, when Christianity came to India in the 1st century AD, they simply gave some temples. Oh, you go and worship in this temple. That's okay, fine. When Jews migrated to India, again some villages and temples were handed over to them. And also the Zoroastrians came to India in the 7th century AD. They came to the Saurashtra coast, and the local Hindu Raja handed over to them some villages and temples. They didn't bother. Oh, they are worshipping already, their own deity they are worshipping. So, you find this very pluralistic attitude, which is an underlying principle. If you go to, as I mentioned, go to India, any Indian family, you don't find, they don't mind, father won't mind if his son doesn't go to Shiva temple, he should go to Krishna temple. All right, go to that. There's no quarrel. But there's an underlying principle. All these are different roads leading to the same goal. They may not intellectually make a statement about it, but there is an inner feeling that everything is the same.
Like Swami Vivekananda said, to every man his own religion.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you for these wonderful questions and discussions. Hopefully we'll meet. I'm very happy to find our great friends from India joining with great enthusiasm. They should. It's wonderful to see all of you. Okay. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Namaskar.
Recording stopped.
Thank you, Lord.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lord.
Namaskar.